Hello and welcome to CS++. This is our introductory programming lesson in JavaScript. This is Unit 8.1, and we're going to look at variables and setting up variables, as well as some simple math. So hopefully you've already gotten a link from your teacher from GitHub Classroom, and you've opened this in code spaces. If you're not sure how to do that, go ahead and check out our last video about student setup. Once your code spaces loads, you will see the README. And this has a table of contents, and you'll see exactly what we're doing today. We're going to go through what a variable is. We're going to talk about some simple math. We're going to talk about order of operations, string concatenation, how to use prompts and alerts, converting strings to numbers, formatting decimals using the toFixed method, and then we'll do a short assignment that's worth 100 points, and we'll do that together. And then you'll see the rubric down at the bottom. And then these are also very useful tips for success, and there's a frequently asked questions section. So let's start by looking at what a variable is in JavaScript. So the best way to create a variable in JavaScript these days is using the word let, and then followed by a variable name. And this can be anything you want. The naming convention says it should start with a lowercase letter, and if there are additional words, we can capitalize the next word using what we call camel casing. Pretty much anything goes here, except you should start with a letter, and we shouldn't use any weird symbols or spaces. You can technically use $signs and underscores, but those are usually reserved for other things. So if you say it's something like let score equal 95, this is creating in one step something called score, and there's also assigning a value of 95 to that score. Likewise, that is an integer. Likewise, this is a string, and this is saving Alice into the player name variable. In JavaScript, you don't have to define the type, so anything can go into the variable, and you can just use the word let. Sometimes we also want to use constants which do not change, so something like tax rate or max lives. So these naming conventions, usually we capitalize these, and since you can't use camel casing when it's all capitalized, we usually use an underscore or snake case to show a constant. And if you try to say constant x equals 10, and then you try to change x to 20, you will see that you get an error because it is just a way to make sure that you don't accidentally change a constant. And we'll look at all these in a second in the tests. For math operators, these are very similar to what you would use when you are doing everyday math. We have the plus sign, which is addition. Subtraction is the minus sign. The asterisk is multiplication. Slash is divided by. The percent sign is remainder math or modulo. So if you did 10 divided by 3, you would get 3 with a remainder of 1. So your result would be 1. And then there's also a way to do a power, to raise something to a power. So 2 to the third power would be 8. In JavaScript, division is going to give you back a floating point number or a decimal. Some languages it would give you 3, but in JavaScript it would actually give you the decimal, even if both of your numbers are whole numbers or integers. We'll also look at PEMDAS, so parentheses, exponents, and then multiply, divide from left to right, and then add, subtract from left to right. So you can see that this one right here, this would be 14 because it is going to do the multiplication first. If you wanted to add the two numbers before you multiplied, you could change the order of operations by using parentheses. We'll also see that you can add or concatenate two strings together. So anytime that there is a plus sign next to a string, whether it's the left or the right side, it's going to concatenate or combine those two strings together. So first, we'll add to a space, which is hello, and then it'll add or concatenate the word world to it. So you'll see it says hello world. For this one, if you didn't put that space in between, then it would be hello world smushed together. If you want, you can also concatenate numbers, and JavaScript will also automatically convert the number to a string for you. So when you say I am age, it'll convert that to I am 16, the string, and then it'll concatenate years old. To begin, we're also going to, instead of using on-screen text fields, we're going to use prompts and alerts. So just as we start to learn JavaScript, and then we'll later in a couple lessons, we'll start converting to actually using things on screen instead of a pop-up. But a prompt is going to allow you to ask a question, and we'll see that it returns or sends back something to you. So if we ask, what's your name, and they type in Alice, then Alice will be assigned to name. So this is nice to be able to get different input from different users. There's a similar one called an alert, which is very similar in that it pops up on the screen, but this one doesn't return anything. It just shows you a message. So if you have a question and you want a response, you would use a prompt, and an alert would just be a message. We'll also see in our test that you might want to convert a string to a number, because if you try to do simple math to a string, you will probably get unexpected results. And when we get a prompt from a user, that always is going to give us a string. So if we type in 42, it's going to give you 42 in quotes. So you can't really do math to 42 in quotes, because if you try to add to that, it will concatenate. So what we can use is something called parseFloat. So you can see we have parseFloat here, and then inside parentheses we can put a string, and that will turn it into a number, and then we can save that into another variable if we want. So if you have a plus b here, and we have 5 and 3, the string, then this means that we're going to concatenate 5 and 3. So then maybe that was hard-coded, or maybe that was from a user. So the right way to do it would be to change these into numbers and then add them. So we could use parseFloat of a plus parseFloat of b, and then that would turn it into 8, the actual number. Sometimes we also want to have a certain number of decimal points when we display this as a string. So if we had something like pi and we had multiple decimal points, we can round that by using .toFixed. What you'll notice is that doesn't actually change pi. That just gives you a string that will round it to that number of decimal points. So let's get into the assignment. So here we're going to do a couple things. We're going to do a little warm-up with just a greeting. So it's going to prompt the user for their name and ask their favorite color. And then we'll just do a simple concatenation where it says, hello name, your favorite color is color. So you can see an example of Alice's favorite color being blue right here. The next one, we'll do a simple temperature conversion where we have a temperature in Fahrenheit and it converts it to Celsius. And we can just subtract 32 and then multiply by 5 divided by 9 to get an estimate of that temperature. And then for these tests, we want to make sure that we are exactly matching the string that is shown here. So temperature in Celsius with a capital C, colon, space, and then the temperature with 2 decimal points. So we're going to have to use that toFixed here. circleArea. This is going to be another one where we prompt the user for a circle radius, and then we're going to multiply it by pi, and then we're going to multiply it by r squared. And likewise, we're going to have to use 2 decimal points and match this string exactly. Number info. This one is going to grab a whole number from the user, which will be a string, so we have to use parseInt or parseFloat to convert that to a number. And then we want to do 2 things. We want to square it, and then we want to find the remainder when we divide by 3, so using that modulo operator. And then we want to alert square, and then a comma, and then remainder with the same spacing here as well. So you can see some examples right there. So there is another one called var, which we don't really use anymore. This is global, so the scope is kind of confusing. So we're going to use just let from here on out. So if you're used to using var, if you've seen var before, let's start using let to create a variable. We're going to have to use at least one constant. The test is going to check for that. And we want to use parseInt for converting numbers, strings into numbers. And then you can see the different tests that we have that will hopefully get you to 100. So step 1 is to open up your index.html, which is shown over here in your Explorer. And there is a dev container that gives you a couple extensions here, and one of them is going to be a live preview. So in the top right corner, you can click on this little split screen with the magnifying glass. And this should pop up with something like open in the browser, because it's not going to work at first because this is a live server and it needs to open a port. You can also click the little hamburger menu up here and click open in browser. And it should open that web page in a second. And you will see that it already has a couple things like run greeting, convert temperature, calculate area of a circle, and number info. So we want to keep that window open. You can close this one if you want, or if you want to open it back up, it will show you a preview of this. But right here, you can see in the HTML that there's already some things written in here for you. And these are called functions, which we're going to do in a later video. But what these say is when you click these buttons, it's going to automatically run something called greeting, convertTemp, circleArea, and number info. And you don't have to do anything to the HTML here. This is already written for you. What you do need to do is go to script.js, and you will see some comments in here that's going to step you through each one of these programs. And there's also already written function headers for you. So function greeting, convertTemp, all the way down to number info. And all you have to do is step by step go through these to get these to work. So let's start with greeting. So for greeting, step one is going to prompt the user and ask, what is your name? And it's going to store the result in a variable using let. So the first part is let's create that variable. So let, we can call it name. And then we want to save the result of a prompt. So we're going to use the equal sign, which is called an assignment operator. And then on the right side, we're going to add that prompt, and we're going to type, what is your name? So some of these tests do check the string exactly. So you want to make sure that the spacing and the casing is correct for your strings. So step two is we need to prompt the user for the color. So for this one, we can create a new variable called letColor, and we can do something very similar with a prompt where we say, what is your favorite color? Again, trying to make sure that the casing and spacing is correct. And then you can see step three here is use an alert to display a message. It should be exactly hello name, exclamation point. Your favorite color is color. So we want to use string concatenation to build this. So you could create a variable to do this, or you could just do this all in one step. So you could use an alert, and then you could say hello, the capital H, comma, space, and then concatenate their name, and then concatenate an exclamation point, space, your favorite color is, space, and then concatenate color. And then finally an exclamation or a period at the end. And you can test to see if this works, because you can go back to your web page that is open, refresh it, and then click run greeting. What is your name? Bob. What is your favorite color? Yellow. Hello, Bob. Your favorite color is yellow. And that string should match. And the next one we're going to do is called convertTemperature. So this is converting the temperature from Fahrenheit to Celsius. So again, we want to match the strings exactly. So this is going to be a number, but if you remember, the prompt is going to be a string. So we're going to have to do an extra step here. So here we can do let temp equals, and then we can ask them for a prompt. And you want to make sure that it is exactly the same as you have up here. Enter temperature in Fahrenheit. But again, what happens here is this is a string. If we want, in one step, we can do a parseFloat to turn into a number. Or if you want to follow along with the comments, you can just create a new one. You don't have to create a new variable. You can just save over the one that they put in. So you can just say temp equals parseFloat of temp. So that's going to turn temp into a number, and it's going to save it back into itself. And then for the next step, we can get the new temp, right? So we can create another variable called new temp. And here we're going to take our current temp, subtract 32, and then we want that to happen in that order. So we want to put parentheses around it. And then we want to multiply by 5 over 9. And then you can see here the directions. We want to alert this. And we want to say exactly temperature in Celsius, and then we want it to have 2 decimal points. So again, make sure you have that colon and that space in the correct spot. And then we can concatenate the new temperature, which we called new temp. And then to make it 2 decimal points, we want to use toFixed, and we put parentheses and the number 2 in here. And you can see that returns, the thing after the colon means it returns or sends back a string to you. And that's what we are putting concatenated with the temperature in Celsius. So what we can do is we can just check this out again by refreshing our page. We can get convertTemp. We could try 100, and 100 degrees in Celsius says 37.78. If you click it again and try 32, you would get exactly 0. So that seems like it's working well. All right, for the next one, we have the area of a circle. So again, you can use these to step through them, but the first thing is going to be to use that prompt again. So we can do let, we'll call it input equals prompt, and then enter circle radius. No punctuation at the end there. Then we can change that using parseFloat. So input equals parseFloat of input. Step 3 is going to be to calculate the area using the formula Math.PI times radius times radius. So Math.PI is actually a built-in constant that exists in something called the math class, which we'll look at later. So we have to use a constant to pass our tests. So what we can do is we can say const, and then usually constants are capitalized, so const pi equals, and then you could use Math.PI, or you could type out 3.1415, but you will see pi shows up here. So do you need to do this? It probably doesn't really save you anything, but now every time you want to use pi, you can say just pi instead of Math.PI. But to satisfy our test, we need to use a constant somewhere. And then we can find the area of the circle. So if you want, you can actually do the math on one line, setting a new variable, or you can do it right inside the alert. So we could say alert area of the circle, colon space, and then concatenate. And then this is all going to be one big number, so we're going to have to use toFixed on it, so we probably want to put it in parentheses. So this is going to be pi times input. And then to square the input, you can either do input times input, or asterisk asterisk 2 would raise it to the second power. And then that gives you a number, so we can say dot toFixed on the end of that. And then we want 2 decimal points. So before we move to the last one, let's go over to our web page, refresh it, calculate the area of a circle, radius of 100, and the area is a very large number, 31,415.93. If you click the button again and you put in 1, you get 3.14. So that seems like it's working. And let's do the last one. So the last one is just number info. So this is just making sure that we are doing it the correct way. So we want to prompt for a whole number and calculate its square and its remainder when dividing by 3. So just using the squared, which we used right here, and also using modulo, which is the percent sign. So step 1, use the prompt to enter a whole number. So if you want, you can call it input again. The reason why you can do this is because we're in a different function. So when you use let, it only exists inside the scope of what you declare it inside of. And then we could do prompt. If you wanted to, you can do this all in one step. So before you prompt, you could do a parseInt or a parseFloat, and then you can prompt for it inside of here. And the prompt for this one is enter a whole number. So we did step 1 and 2 together, and it's called input. For step 3, we want to square it, so we can create a new variable. Let's call it squared. And that would simply just be our number, which is input, asterisk, asterisk 2. So raising something to a power. And to find the remainder, we'll call it rem. This is simply just you divide the number or the input by 3. Instead of using just division, we're going to use the percent sign, which is modulo. So just give me the remainder. And then the final thing is to alert it in the exact same way as it shows you right here. So square, colon, space, and then concatenate square, and then plus, and then we have a comma afterwards, remainder, and then a colon and a space, and then concatenate your remainder, which is rem. And that should be it. So we can go back over to our web page, refresh it, click number info. Let's do a whole number. Let's go 9. Let's do 10 because that would be a 0 remainder. So that squared is 100 and the remainder is 1. So once you have everything working to submit these, there is over here a version control which is going to be connected to your GitHub account. So if you click this, you will see that you've changed the script.js folder. So what you need to do is you need to make sure you put a commit message here. You can do like, I'm done. And you can either click commit or you could click commit and push. If you do it this way, it'll save you a step of hitting commit and then sync. So committing is saving it locally and pushing it is sending it back to github.com. And anytime there's a change on github.com, it will trigger an action which will allow you to see if you pass the test. So if you go back over to your GitHub and you refresh that, you should see a little tiny yellow gold dot here saying pending. That means your tests are running. So you can always click on this and click details, or you can go up to the actions tab up here and you can click on here and you will see it working. So if you click on this, you can click on this again and dive deeper into the test. But sometimes this takes up to a minute and it will show you your results if you pass the test. If you pass all of your tests, you'll get a green check mark. If you fail one of them, you will get a red X, but you might get more than 0 points. So there should be a summary here that tells you you got it or not. And as you can see here, I got all of my tests. If you didn't, then you would just go back to your thing. You would make changes, and then as soon as you make a change, you can commit it again. So that is the basics of variables and math. In the next one, we'll start looking at some methods we can use from something called the math class, as well as some from what we call the string class. I will see you then.